Good to see you, man.
Good to be here.
The last show we did was very popular.
Good.
And Danny would probably say it's the show I've referred to most. Would you say that since that?
I think I said that to you.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, on the way over, you mentioned that.
You got to keep with the mic, see? That's why we're getting headphones.
Okay.
That's where you notice it. Yes.
And I should thank you, actually, because I think until that point, my Bitcoin journey had been a rather lonely one, because I really kind of got into Bitcoin at the start of the pandemic and I had a lot of time on my hands, and so I kind of really went deep on it. But what I probably didn't appreciate until I did your show the first time was that it had been sort of a very insular thing. And then after I did the show, a whole bunch of people started reaching out to me. So I guess it resonated with a number of people. And some people just wanted to say hi, and that's great. But I met a couple of really interesting characters off the back of that. So, I mean, a couple of them are worth mentioning, because I'm going to come to your live thing next week.
Oh, you're coming? Great.
Yeah, I'll come along to that. And I want to introduce you to a chap called David Parkinson, who is building out a payment system in the UK. Mm-hmm. So that's a business which is just getting off the ground now, and I'm going to be involved in that and help in whatever way I can. And the other one is a chap called Jeremy Casey.
I feel like I know that name.
You might well do. He's quite the evangelist.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, he's the sort of guy that can't walk past a restaurant without going in and converting them to Bitcoin and getting them to start accepting it.
I think sometimes those people turn people off. They're a bit annoying. It's like one of those fucking Bitcoiners.
He does it quite well, actually.
Okay.
And he's kind of started this regular Bitcoin meetup in London now that's been going. So every couple of months we all sort of get together, and I've gone along to those and spoken at them. And it seems to be taking off. So I think he's going to tie up with Jordan from the Bitcoin Collective.
Yeah. Spoke to Jordan today.
Oh, okay. So they're probably going to put their heads together and come up with something bigger in London, which will be fantastic, because it will be a forum where every 2-3 months, something like that, the plebs can get together and have a beer and talk Bitcoin. But also it will be a forum where you can get policymakers, chief execs, that sort of kind of crowd to come along, and just it's in this environment for them to start talking and engaging with this stuff and saying, what can it do for me? What can it do for my business? How can I think about it? So there's a lot of value in something like that. And I think what being involved with these chaps have shown me is that the thing where people say, you just got to hodl, you just got to hold, and that's all. That's the only thing you've got to do. Is making me realize, no, actually,
they're completely wrong.
Yeah, you've got to build.
Yeah,
you've got to build out the infrastructure like David is, and you've got to grow the network like Jeremy is. And if you're doing those things, the Bitcoin will only be worth $1 million when it's genuinely worth $1 million to people, because it has that value, because it has their network. So, as it becomes easier to use, and as we get 2 billion people on it across the world, that's when it will really sort of take off. It's a crucial moment.
I love what Jordan's doing. I think he's a great guy. The event they put up in Edinburgh, actually, my son and daughter came along. They ran the merch stand for me while I was wandering around. Did very well. Okay. Yeah, did very well. I think we sold about it's Real Bedford merch, the football team stuff. They always do very well. We always sell about, I think we did about $3,000. Yeah, $3,000 we did. And I've done another event. We did about 6,000, which is great, because the money just goes all into the football club. And but I when I heard about this event that they were doing, I didn't know them, didn't know anything of them, and part of me was a little bit like apprehensive, nervous for them. I was thinking, in my head, I just pictured something that wouldn't be that great. And that's probably really
picturing
unfair.
Something a bit cringy then,
a little bit The Office,
nerdish.
A little bit The Office.
Okay.
I have to hold my hands up to them, and look, they crushed it. They had great speakers, they had great talks, they had really good people there. They had it's just a really good event, really well organized, and the reason I've spoken to Jordan is we're doing this live event next week, but a year later we're going to do our own event. We're going to do a full 1, possibly 2-day conference here in Bedford, which I used to think about as like, that's difficult. How do you get that many people to Bedford? Then I realized people will go to the places where Bitcoin exists, and Bedford has a Bitcoin. Bedford is a center for Bitcoin because of the club, because of me and what we've been doing here. And so, we're going to go for it. And I want Jordan's help. I want him to support what we're doing. But that's really cool that you're in with the nerds, man.
Yeah, The plebs, yeah.
Remember the plebs?
Yeah, it was valuable. So, when you start to build these sort of networks, you start to see sort of the depth behind this movement, and real good quality people as well, people who've done some sort of serious thinking about stuff. So, yeah, getting involved in person, being able to have a beer with somebody, there's a lot of value with that, because it is so easy to sort of have your Bitcoin experience as being a purely online thing, because there's so many podcasts and ways you can sort of get involved over the net, but actually there's no substitute for just standing there and having a chat with somebody with a beer in your hand.
Well, we have the exact same feeling about why we do the interviews in person. Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's a bit easier with you because you're British, but you can very easily do a remote show. And most people do. Almost everyone does. I mean, Jordan Peterson's is remote. Russell Brand's is remote. Most of them do remote stuff, some in person. But you get a few people, like Rogan, who stick to in person. Rich Roll, it sticks to in person.
Yeah.
And we try the best we can. We can't do it always because we have to react to news. But the conversations in person, they're just infinitely better. It's a higher quality. And you get that relationship.
Another thing I've started doing is I'm spending a couple of days a week now with the Lotus Eaters team. So lotuseaters.com.
They're the ones you were writing for before, was it, or something?
No, I was just having conversations with them.
Okay.
I was just sorting something out with them. So, but now I've sort of joined them 2 days a week, and I've got a show there called Brokenomics, where I'm looking at why the financial system's gone wrong, trying to explain the components of it. And I found exactly the same thing. So I have had guests along for that. And I did one guy who lives in Barcelona, so I did that one remotely. But the rest of them, I've got the guys to come in. And you're right, it is a far superior experience when you can look somebody in the eye and you get that sort of more natural rhythm of getting into the conversation with them.
Well, there's no latency. Latency kills the online conversation.
Well, we're getting some latency here, but
Danny, tell him. Don't take that.
I'm trying very hard here.
Yeah, don't take that. So anyway, back to what I was saying. It's been the show I've referenced people back to during the show, but even outside of the show the most. I don't know if you remember, I said one of the difficulties I have is trying to explain the problems with the financial system without sounding like a conspiracy theorist.
Yes.
And I've really struggled. Like CBDCs are a great example. When I try and explain to people what is wrong with CBDCs and say, well, look, it's giving the government too much information. We could end up with a Chinese-style surveillance state whereby if you go to buy things, you're told you can't and you have a social credit score. And they're like, you're a fucking nutter. Like, what are you on about? And I know I'm right. I know the threat of what I'm talking about. Yet, when you're trying to explain this to a normal person, they're like, what are you on about? And so what I'd been doing and I thought the best data point within, and we're gonna have to go back through it, but the best data point for me was 120 billion is spent on servicing debt.
Yes.
Like the interest.
And you get nothing for that.
Nothing's paid off. And so what I've been saying to people is, hey, just so you know how fucked the UK financial system is and the economy is, do you know how much money the government brings in tax receipts? And they're usually like, no, it's about 1 to 1.1 trillion. And I'm like, do you know what the biggest expense is? And a lot of people get that right. Not everyone, but most people are like, is it the NHS? It's about 200 billion. I'm like, what do you think it is next? And all kinds of things, pensions, whatever. And I was like, no, it is servicing the interest of the debt that they've accumulated. And I said, do you want to know why that's crazy? Because it's 120 billion, yet they only spend 76 billion on education. So they're spending almost double on servicing interest of the debt than they're spending on education. Imagine they had that 120 billion a year to put into education.
Well, and as I pointed out, a lot of that spend is not actually departmental spend, it's non-cash items. So once you strip that out, that's why the debt interest goes directly after the NHS. And it wouldn't take too much in growth of debt interest to go beyond the operational budget of the NHS, even though the total spend, including the sort of depreciation and other items they got in there, is a little bit higher.
But let me just get to my point.
Yes, sorry.
The point I was getting to. So I'd explain this to them, and I'm thinking, I'm going to get you here. You're going to finally realise this is all fucked. And then they're like, oh, okay. Anyway, do you see Man U lost yesterday? And it's like,
yes.
Yeah, I'm literally telling you about the collapse of the financial system, how you're being robbed by the government. And I know what's going to happen. We're going to come to another election, and they're going to be like, I don't think I can vote for Richie, so I might have to vote for Keir. And it's just like, no, it's all fucked.
Yeah.
And I can't.
Changing from the red team to the blue team is not going to do a damn thing.
Well, it is if you're a Man U fan, because you might actually win the league, but not in regards to politics.
This feels very pointed.
Oh, well, hey, that's
I don't follow football at all, so that reference went over my head.
That's a wild accusation, Daniel Knowles. Yeah, Danny's a Man U fan. I'm just giving him some shit.
Oh, okay.
But no, you're right. So anyway, so the point I've been trying to get to is I felt like you gave me the ammo, and I went out with the ammo.
Right.
And I was just shooting blanks everywhere. No, nothing was sticking. Nobody was going.
Yes. So, I mean, what you've just said and the comments that you made in the first interview, I did hear you. And that's kind of where I want to come at it today. I kind of want to address those points.
Okay.
Because people have a set of ingrained assumptions in their thinking that is not letting them get past a certain point. And frankly, you're not going to be able to persuade everybody. But I think we need to understand, because last episode, what I did is I explained that we are in trouble. And there is effectively no way out of that. I systematically went through each of the options. So what was it now? It was growth.
Well, let's do a TLDR. Let's remind everyone what it was. But the interesting thing is, since we've done that, everything's got worse and the banks are starting to collapse. But anyway, do you want to remind people what the issue is?
So let's go through it. So the summary is that for every £1 the government collects in taxes, it spends £1.30. And the debt element of that is going up all of the time, and you're not getting anything for that. And effectively, we're in a debt spiral. The reason being is because, let me see. So the total amount of debt that we have here in the UK is about 100% of GDP. So the coupon on the debt is about 4 going on for 5%. So
explain the coupon on the debt.
So the interest payments.
Yeah, you go.
So if you want to rectify that situation, because it's 100% of GDP versus 100% of debt, is pretty much a one-to-one relationship. So the growth of the economy has to exceed the growth of the debt. But we're not going to get growth of greater than 4%. We're getting sort of typically, in the 1.5% range. Historically, it's been about 3%.
So would you say historically, if the government was accumulating debt below the growth rate, that's okay?
Yes. So debt accumulation below the growth. Well, I wouldn't necessarily say it's okay, because you kind of should be living within your means, but it's manageable. But because we've got a series of bad assumptions in our economic thinking, in our societal thinking, our political thinking, we have got to the point where this has become sort of in-baked. Actually, you spoke to a US economics professor a couple of episodes after I was on, and he was able to explain the whole thing in about a sentence. I thought it was brilliant. I should have.
Josh Hendrickson, maybe?
Possibly. I forget his name.
Yes, it was Josh Hendrickson. Yeah, he is the professor.
So he explained it brilliantly. And I wish I had thought of this. And the way he summed it up was...
Was this the insurance, or was that you?
The insurance?
So he said since World War II, governments have become insurance providers.
No, that was Dan.
That was you.
Let me sort of paraphrase the way that he did it, because I thought it was quite neat. So he said that effectively we are fighting a total war at this point in terms of our level of spending, but that total war is directed at, the thing with wars is they end, but the total we're fighting is against old age, sickness, people who don't work. So it's basically insurance schemes. So it's a war that cannot end. So this spending is going on. The growth of the spending exceeds the growth of the economy, therefore debt spiral. And what I did, the TLDR with the first episode, although it would probably help if people just went and watched that, because that would give the full explanation, but the TLDR of that is you can't get out of it. And I set out the reasons why. So growth, we can't exceed 4%. We're struggling to get 1.5 at the moment. Historically, growth rates have been about 3%, but we've got a lot of government, a lot of regulation, a lot of taxes, and that is sitting on the creative output of the economy. So growth rates are low. The second one was tax the rich, and I didn't mess around there. I said, okay, let's just take all of the wealth from the Times Rich List 250. Just take the whole lot, and it came to whatever it came to, maybe 600-something billion.
Yeah.
And that pays for 7 months of government spending.
Yeah, and also if you do that, they're all going to leave the UK.
Yeah, and you wouldn't get it in the first place because, people like Roman Abramovich, they are not keeping their money in the Lloyd's current account.
Well, I mean, all his money's in the government account right now, isn't it?
Oh, okay. Well, maybe he's a bad example, but okay, maybe.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
220 on the Times, which is Rishi Sunak. I mean, even he is probably not keeping all his money in a Lloyd's current account. You know, that money is that money will fly the moment there's any suggestion of sort of wealth seizures.
He's 220. Is that his money or is his wife's money?
Oh, probably the wife, I'd imagine. Yeah. PM salary is good, but I don't think it's that good.
Yeah, I can't imagine him putting in place a policy whereby he would give away 100% of his money.
Yeah, well, you can't see Keir Starmer doing it either. So, I mean, nobody's going to do this. So, and it's not like you can just take the next 250 and the next 250 because, you know, the 250 richest people in the country, the 250 under them own a tiny fraction of what the top 250 own.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to try and address the debt problem by seizing wealth, I mean, you would be seizing wealth right down to your great auntie Edna, who's got a second cottage somewhere. I mean, it would have to go all the way down. Another one was cut spending that we talked about, and that was probably the main focus. It was helpful to have three Brits around the table when we were talking about that, because we were talking about things like cutting the spending of the NHS in half effectively, and that's just not going to happen. You know, the NHS is basically religion in this country, so that doesn't work. And you would have to cut the operational budget of basically everything in government by half at this point to get the spending under control.
Remind me, the target was 250 billion, so that we could have a balanced books and then pay 120 billion off a year and therefore clear the debt in 20 years.
That
was about
right.
the math.
Yeah.
Because we were increasing the national debt by about 120 billion a year.
Yeah, so flip that the other way.
Yeah. So if you cut by 120 billion, you tread water. And if you cut by 250, you can pay it off over 20 years.
Yes.
At the moment, they're doing the opposite. They're increasing it.
Yes. Yeah.
And so just remind people, why should they care about them increasing the national debt every year by 120 billion?
Well, because eventually it's going to squeeze out everything else.
Yes, exactly.
And okay, I'll tell you the last one is going to be to print. So basically, that's the error term in all of this is print the money, and then you will get a pension, but you won't be able to buy anything with it, and it will screw over everybody else as well. Everybody who's working. So financial assets will do somewhat better because they'll just be redenominated by the new larger money supply. But certainly if you're earning, you're going to get squeezed out by that.
I thought about it a lot afterwards, and I thought, how would you save 250 billion? And my starting point was halving the budget of the NHS. And
yeah,
I mean, I don't know.
Try getting elected with that.
But I think it would need cross-party consensus. And I think we're at a stage whereby cross-party consensus is needed for the constituents and for the country, and that's becoming a more important point than the career goals or the power gains of politicians. And the political hot potato of the NHS should not be used as a voting tool, but it is, with people who really do not understand the situation we're in. That said, we're heading towards it with, it used to be 4 hours, used to be like the generally accepted wait time in the NHS. It's now 6, 7, 8 hours. Everyone's striking. I don't think we should be getting away from people having access to free healthcare. I think we should be getting away from everyone having access to free healthcare. And I think we should be doing things like in Ireland, where my father lives, where everybody has to pay for a doctor's appointment. Lots of things like that. Interesting anecdote for you. I bumped into a ambulance worker in a local shop, and I was like, "Oh, I've got some questions for you." Anyway, we were talking about the problems. When the strikes happened, Bedford wasn't striking. They weren't part of the union that was striking.
Right.
They said the intake within their accident and emergency department fell off a cliff, and the wait time, I can't remember what she told me, the wait times were like 1-2 hours because everybody thought there was people striking, so they weren't phoning up ambulances. They weren't going into they got rid of all the people who were going with anxiety, panic attacks, and nothing issues. And so I think the thing is if you have a health service with no friction, people are going to overuse it. And so anyway, my personal point is that maybe you only support, it's highly controversial, but you only support the people who absolutely need free healthcare, and most people should have an insurance. And then I think you go department by department, slashing and burning all this fucking wasteful shit they do. I think you can save it within government.
Possibly, but you just can't get elected.
No, of course. That's why cross-party consensus is needed.
Yeah, but it doesn't feel like we're anywhere close to that, because you play that game out. Let's say you go to the opposition, you say we both need to go forward, and we both need to say that we need to bring in these sort of radical cuts. The opportunity for the other team to renege on that and take the opposite view and win power, and then to say, okay, I'll just kick the can down the road 10 years, I'll have my time in office, and then it will be the problem with the next guy. And that's what they all think. They're all trying to kick the can down the road.
Of course.
Now, the only, take France at the moment. So they have kicked the can down the road on the pension thing for so long that it has now got to the point where the incumbent set of politicians are realising that this is going to break on their watch, and therefore they need to do something. And that sort of explains why Macron is pushing through something incredibly unpopular at this point, because he knows the alternative is worse. So,
but it's a strange one, really, because those pension reforms won't affect. I mean, there's such a lag for that to come into place that it really won't affect him right now.
It might affect his ability to borrow, to keep things on track right now. So that's one thing. Okay, all of that said, I have come to possibly see a growth route out of this.
Okay, you're not going to crash the economy like Liz Truss.
No, this is actually. Are you using GPT, ChatGPT?
A little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of remarkable, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah,
it is. I've got this me and Danny have tried some things, right? For example, we could have said to ChatGPT, today I'm interviewing Dan Tubb. Here's some details on him. Give us 20 questions to ask him today. And you would get through it, and you'd probably maybe use about half of them maybe, and the others you'd reword them. But
probably not even half without seriously editing them.
But it gives you a starting point. Or recently, when I've been writing articles, I've got it to just build my structure.
Well, it solves the blank page problem. It gets you off zero.
Gets you off
really
zero.
Fast.
So I've had 2 articles I've written recently. I've said, do this for me. I've almost written the entire thing again afterwards, but it gave me the structure, which was so useful. But what were the things that you've done where you found it useful?
It's semi-useful for like writing show descriptions. To be honest, I'm not using it that much at the moment, but I think we will try and implement it more in the workflow. But I just asked it how the UK gets rid of its debt issue.
Okay.
All right.
Fiscal discipline, economic growth, inflation, and structural reforms. There it's 4.
Give me what's it saying on structural reforms?
The UK government can implement structural reforms to reduce the long-term cost of public services such as healthcare and pensions. These reforms can include changes to the retirement age, the introduction of private sector competition in public services, and the use of technology to increase efficiency.
I mean, it's that's like what I just said, what you're about to say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's impressive. I've actually been using it for a lot more frivolous stuff than that. I mean, I find it's brilliant for, what did I ask it last night? I asked it, ask me 7 questions and then recommend 7 movies. And it did that, and it does. So it's
interesting.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
You want to do it, don't you?
And I know that it did well because all of the movies that it recommended I had seen and I really liked. So I said, okay, that's great, but give me more obscure ones. And I had to do that a couple of times, and I ended up watching some Spanish time traveler movie or something. But it's a really powerful tool. And then I thought, okay, I could use this now to recommend book series, or you can use it for a whole bunch of other things, but. I think we're only scratching the surface for potentially what this AI technology can do. And actually, what I'm going to reference here is you've interviewed Kathy Woods, haven't you?
Yeah.
So Kathy Woods
Wood.
and her art
Singular.
Wood. Yeah, there's only one of her. That's right. Every year she puts out a big ideas report.
Yep.
And that's really interesting because what it looks at is the convergence of new technologies that are coming forward and how they can reinforce each other. Now, we have had a period like that before. So at the early part of the 1900s, we got things like electricity, steam trains, automobiles. So these technologies that could reinforce each other. And what they did was they increased the growth rate of the West. So the growth rate before that had been sort of, sub 1%. And then after that, in the 1900s, we got a growth rate of 3%. Now, you might think, okay, well, what's the significance of a growth rate of 3% as opposed to, say, 1.5%? Does it really make that much difference? It makes a huge difference. So if you were to rerun the 1900s, take the US and give it a growth rate. So it actually had, between 1900 and 2000, a growth rate of 3%. rerun that again with a growth rate of 1.5%, and the US today would have an economy which is smaller than Brazil's.
So it's compound growth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually it's worse than that because the US has a higher population than Brazil, so GDP per head would be lower than Botswana today. So a fairly small change to the growth rate can have a significant effect down the line. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Western growth rate has been 3% for a while. It starts to get more difficult to draw something meaningful from that post about 2000 because of the magic money tree effects that came along. But as I talked about in the first podcast, we're struggling around sort of 1.5% now, with the debt growing at 4 or 5%. Now, what Kathy's Big Ideas report looked at was the convergence of, this time it isn't trains and electricity and automobiles, it is 3D printing, it's AI, it's self-driving cars, it's the energy revolution stuff that's going on. There's a whole bunch of different trends which, if you combine them together, they think that you can get growth up to about 6% by 2030, and you can get growth up to, I think they said 10.5% by 2040.
Okay.
Now that is absolutely huge.
And that compounded means you can start paying off the debt.
So again, let's go back to that experiment between 1900 and 2000. If you were to give the US a growth of not 3% during the 1900s, but 6%, the US would be 20 times wealthier than it currently is. You would have an economy bigger than the rest of the world put together.
Okay. So the only spanner in the works for this great idea you have is AI is going to kill us all in 3 years' time. Tell them about the podcast you listen to.
Well, it was a Bankless podcast, which is our arch rivals.
Yeah, it's basically what Shitcoin did.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't watch that one, but
Good. But they had this guy on who was basically like an AI expert who was saying that he's completely... He thinks it's going to end the world in the next few years, that it's out of the box, there's no putting it back, it's game over, effectively.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm certainly not an AI expert, but I'm listening to what people are sort of saying on this, and it's not obvious to me why that necessarily needs to be the case.
Well, to be fair, I wouldn't be the right person to answer that, but we have got a guy coming on this week who's going to get into the AI stuff with us.
Was it the guy that I mentioned to you?
Yes, it was.
Yeah,
Andy Phillips, yeah.
Yeah, so this guy, like that Danny's talking about, I haven't listened to it. By the way, I'm only kidding with the Bankless guys, they're all right. But he's an expert on this, and he's kind of flipped negative because he's realized where this can go, the speed of change, the speed at which it's learning. And the thing is, regulating AI is super difficult because it can exist. Like, it can exist in a grey market. It can exist rogue.
And that's his issue. I think he thinks we're just playing too fast and loose with this thing that we don't really know what it can be.
And even Elon said that recently and signed the letter with Steve Wozniak, whoever his name is, and 1,000 other people. And when you start to get it explained to us, is if AI decides it, actually, no, we need these humans dead. They're fucking annoying. Let's get rid of them. If it makes that decision...
There's very little we can do about it,
Yeah, but it only has to be a slight error rate for it to do that. There's just be one bug, one thing that's wrong. You connect, I mean, this is me talking about the connecting AI with CRISPR. Do you know about CRISPR?
Yes. Yeah.
Connect AI with CRISPR, and they're like, let's turn up the, let's get a bit of the virality of COVID, but let's get the death rate of Ebola, and then let's just sprinkle it around.
If the AI gets smart enough and it decides we have to go, then we're gone.
Yeah.
And there's not much we can do about it. But if it goes the other way and it decides to help us, then... there could be a very bright future ahead. I kind of look at it. It's like having a kid. It's like giving birth to a new consciousness. You don't know how your son is going to grow up to think of you 20 or 30 years later. You might think you're a great guy, or you might decide you've got to go.
Well, that's one way of saying it. Also, it might think of us as an ant's nest outside. Yeah. And when I get an ant's nest, I'm like, kill those fuckers. Let's drown them. Let's get rid of them. They're annoying. Rather than going, how could those ants help me? Well, they could carry the leaves away. Like, so it might just exterminate us. We might all be dead.
Yeah, it might do.
Maybe that's it.
But it also offers us the possibility to get us out of the debt hole that we're in.
Okay.
So there are possible upsides, even though we might all die.
Well, if we're all dead, the debt hole...
Yeah, I suppose that's another way of solving the problem.
There's no debt hole.
Maybe that's the solution.
Yeah, fuck. All right, come on. Hit me with it.
So that growth, is a potential revision of what I put forward in the first podcast, that potentially we could get another growth. Now, I kind of have mixed feelings about that. I mean, it'd be fantastic if we did get the sort of growth that Kathy is talking about with the convergence of these different ideas. On the other hand, it does bail our current elites out of the hole that they've dug for us.
Yeah, but that's the way it works. It's a bit like, have you just seen the new IMF loan that went to Sri Lanka that's announced today? A $3 billion loan.
That.
Basically, see if you can find it, Danny. It's a new $3 billion loan to Sri Lanka, which requires ongoing austerity for the peasants. Yeah. But it's a bailout for the elites, and it's austerity for the peasants.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The US are always like this, aren't they? They're like, you can't just print money. No. You have to have austerity. You need to cut, and then they go and print another $1 trillion.
Yeah, and by the way, give us your resources.
Yeah.
Did you ever listen to the show I made with Alex Gladstein about economic imperialism?
I might have done.
Yeah, it was a fascinating show. And I think Sri Lanka, it was Bangladesh for the example, but he just talked about this. Essentially, the IMF and the World Bank, they just really enforce economic imperialism across the rest of the world just to steal their resources.
And one of the things that I've noticed that they've been talking about lately is copying the China model. So the China model is, we're going to give you loans, which you probably can't pay off, and then those are going to be secured against land and natural resources.
Ports.
Yeah, and they're effectively just acquiring all of these assets when the debt defaults. I have seen some papers, I can't remember which one now, but the West has been looking at that model and thinking, well, that's quite clever, we should do that. So I'm wondering if the Sri Lankan's loan that you're talking about that came out today, that's probably got some of those provisions in it. It's, we're going to give you this money, but when you do default on it, we're going to end up owning...
Well, who's we though? Because the IMF, as a US-controlled institution, it probably says it's independent, but I can imagine its head offices
it's
are
based in DC, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, but like the UN being in New York. Whereas China is a nation state. They literally can just take ownership. But anyway, okay.
I mean, I don't know the details of this particular loan. I haven't seen it, but I'm wondering if elements of that are going to be brought in. So we know we're in a mess. We know it's very difficult to climb out of it. Potentially one of the only ways that we could grow our way out of it is the AI, which might kill us. So on more conventional grounds, I think it's probably worth talking about how did we get into this problem? Because the last episode was all about we're in it and how we're not going to get out of it. But how did we get into it in the first place? And for that, I kind of need to call out the group that is behind this, that led us into that situation in the first place.
Okay.
I'm referring to the boomers.
Hold on, have we got one in the room? Is he a boomer? What's
Might
the
be before
what's the?
I think it's born between something like 1950, about there, maybe the late 40s, and...
Can you check it? We might have a boomer in the room with us.
Yeah,
46 to 64.
He's in. We've got a boomer here. All
It's
right.
all your fault.
Yeah. Thanks, Jerry. All right. So tell me about the boomers.
So I am not saying that there is anything wrong with the boomers as people. I'm not saying that Jupiter was in alignment with Saturn and in their birth years, and it happened to produce a particularly malevolent class of people. It's nothing like that. It's just that they were a very large generation going into a very small world. And what that did is it gave them a mindset which was true for most of their life, which is continuing to be implemented, which is at the root of a lot of these problems. So what do I mean by that? So the boomers, what they saw is they saw constant workforce expansion over their life. And that was initially driven by themselves because they're a very large generation. So as they came into the workforce, they grew it. They all went out, bought a suit, a car, a house. They expanded the economy as they went. And then even when that began to crap out, then you got the effects of globalization. China was brought into the workforce and India was brought into the global workforce. So throughout their working lives, they have seen this constant expansion. And when you get that constant expansion, it becomes very easy to implement pay-as-you-go government policies. So things like healthcare, pensions, welfare state, all that kind of stuff.
They also got the digital revolution.
Yeah, that's slightly different. So I think this is where it started to unravel.
Okay.
So this is probably the argument that Jeff Booth would make. So he makes it very well. So before I address the unraveling of that, the other thing is that they operated under a economic model, which if I were to oversimplify it, I'd just describe it as more. So there was always more. So it was another factory, another worker, another product line. It was all about that expansion. It's more, all the time. And the way that Jeff Booth describes that transition was looking at the case study of Blockbuster Video. Mm-hmm. So it was always one more store, one more video title, one more employee, that constant expansion. And then Netflix came along and they reduced the marginal cost of video distribution down to 0. And all of a sudden, that capital expansive model no longer worked. We had changed from more to more for less.
Okay.
So efficiency. So entering the digital age, it sort of flipped that around. So the boomers, they experienced that constant workforce expansion. They operated under a capital expansion model of the economy. And that is very supportive of fiat money, expanding fiat money. So one of the problems you will have, criticizing fiat money is, you can say, well, this all changed in 1971. And they can push back and say, well, yeah, but it's worked for the last 50 years. I mean, it's worked. I mean, it's worked for me. I've got a house, I've got a car, everything seems to be fine. Why is it that you're telling me that fiat money can no longer work for the next 50 years?
Well, because if you actually look at it, it's worked while we've slowly eroded the middle class.
Yeah. But you can see why a lot of people are going to feel superficially that it's worked.
Yeah, because they think they have more.
Yes.
So I made a film about inflation with Dominic Frisby, and he talked about this. And he said, what one salary used to provide, two salaries now can't provide. So we've gone to a stage where both parents tend to be working and they're still living to their limit of their budget, trying to have a house, have a car, and have their holidays. And people are getting squeezed. And he said this is essentially a squeezing of the middle class. And he said the best way to destroy a society is to destroy the middle class. I think he said it was a Stalin or a Lenin thing. But he talked me through that, and he talked about the inflationary increase in prices of things that the kind of day-to-day things like cars, houses, whatever.
And it's very obvious when you look back several decades, but you can understand why the people who are in it, I mean, they think, well, my house is now worth a lot more than I paid for it.
Yes.
It's very easy to get caught up in, oh, this has been a good thing for me, and you don't tend to notice what you've lost until you compare it to perhaps the next generation, who, husband and wife do both need to work. They both need to, put the child into childcare and, turn up at the office or whatever it is. So the other thing that I think is more relevant here is the government response to this. So the boomers wanted to be compassionate to their elderly, so they introduced a generous pension system. They introduced, they didn't quite introduce it themselves, but they expanded the rollout of the NHS and all of these other sort of insurance provisions. Now, when you are a very large generation supporting a small generation before you, that's very easy to do. So you can see why the government insurance programs have expanded to the point that they have. Now, of course, while they're doing that, they have normal levels of self-interest. They are they've got half an eye on, yes, we're being generous to the elderly today, but we've also got half an eye on, this will be nice for us when we retire as well. So I'm not completely letting them off the hook, but it is primarily a demographic change that have led them into this situation.
And when you say boomers, is it unfair to pick on the people who've benefited from it, and this is really the fault of those who set policy?
Yeah, I mean,
we all want more.
Yes,
we all work hard for more. Danny works hard. I work hard. Everybody works. You work hard. We all work hard for more. We all want a bigger house, or we all want that. So is it not really the fault of the bankers, the central bankers, and the policymakers who have led us into this desire for constant growth, ever expanding fiat money to support growth at all costs, elimination of the the bust part of the boom and bust cycle? Is it that who we should be blaming?
Yeah, I think that's perfectly fair. I mean, there is. The mess we're in there's a lot of blame to go around. I'm just making the point that we have ended up with these enormously expensive social insurance level of spending, which has been facilitated by all those things that you mentioned, the central banking, the fiat money.
Okay, and this is why there's so much fear about population decline, which is evidently happening.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, what did I read? Japan, they're looking at it, a 25% fall in the size of the population over a certain period. We're not going to have enough workers to pay for everything for the retirees.
You can see why all governments, including the ones who claim to be against it, are in practice so in favour of immigration.
Yes.
Because they know that they need to get sort of more workers into the system, because the system has been designed to only function when there is more.
Well, driving growth requires a growing population of workers as well.
Yeah.
Or AI bots.
Yes, possibly.
Possibly. Okay.
So, this has led to an extraordinary level of boomer wealth. They saw significant real level housing increase. So this is beyond the rate of inflation. Real house prices has increased significantly. They saw their wages rise every year, and that went up until I believe the people born in about 1975, when those guys came into the workforce. It started to turn the other way. And so we've now had about 30 years or so of real-time wages decline. But nevertheless, this was sort of baked into the assumptions. Pensions is a big element of this as well. So a lot of the boomers had defined benefit. Defined benefit pension schemes.
Final salary pension schemes.
Yeah. And again, this goes back to them. That they sort of brought this stuff in wanting to be generous to the people above them, by bringing in this sort of pension stuff, but with half an eye on when they would want it themselves. And they started to make those, through policy, more and more attractive. So they did things like protect the benefits of widows if the main character on the pension were to die early, protecting the right of early leavers. And what it's done is it made those pension contributions quite, excessive, really. So today, a lot of companies who have had in the past a defined benefit pension scheme, the vast majority of their contributions is going to that class of pensions, even though they don't offer it when they haven't offered it for many years now, to new entrants who are getting a defined contribution scheme. So a lot of wealth comes from that as well. Then there's benefit of things like the NHS as well. If you wanted to hit the demographic jackpot in life, you wanted to be born in 1956, because you sort of crested the wave of putting the least into the system while getting the most out of it as well, in terms of the NHS and other benefits that you got from the back of that. Now, what it's led to is that the people who are in their 70s today are on average 40% wealthier than people in their 70s just 10 years ago. So it is boomers have got a
compound growth.
Because you expect to get wealthier as you get older.
Yeah.
But it's well in excess of other cohorts from other decades.
Right.
So you've got that big concentration of expansion. And what it's given them is a whole set of faulty assumptions, which when you apply those today, are effectively breaking the whole system for us. So it's that constant workforce expansion. It's the expansionary money works for them. I think they have got away with fairly weak family units in the West that you don't see in perhaps Asian countries. So that's worth coming back to. Other assumptions, they've often assumed that old is the same thing as being poor. So if you looked at policymakers in, say, the 80s and 90s, if they wanted to do something for poor people, they basically just did something for pensioners, because they were effectively one and the same thing. You didn't really even need to means test it. So a lot of everything from like free bus passes to sort of free entry to events and stuff like that. It is no longer the case that being old equals being poor. In fact, if anything, the retirees' disposable income now matches the average of working people.
Wow!
And if you go lower down the income band, so that say the poorest 20% of pensioners versus the poorest 20% of working, they're significantly above. So that's been a part of it as well. And so that has got me then thinking about the whole range of assumptions which our society is working under. Now, if you've got the wrong set of assumptions, when you try and solve a problem, you are going to end up making it worse because you've got the wrong assumptions going into this. Now, so far I've been, very generous towards the boomers, and, yes, they have sort of led us to this point through policy preferences and voting preferences, and everything else has gone along with it. And I certainly do take your point that there are other influences as well, the central banking influence behind that as well. So it's a combination of things of voting for politicians who've done this, but also the toleration of that kind of thing has had a big effect. So I'm not blaming them as people. It is primarily a demographic effect. However, there is one thing that does rankle me, and that is, for the overwhelming majority of boomers, the TV is a primary sense organ. So try telling a boomer that something that they're told on TV is not the case. You can't make a boomer believe in something if he hasn't seen it on TV first. Now, hashtag not all. There are exceptions to this, but it is a remarkable hold that it has over a large segment of the voting population. That, I think you've described it yourself. I think you talked about, you put something on your Facebook page, and
yes. About CBDC. That was about CBDCs.
Okay,
and someone blocked me.
Yes,
yeah,
because you were saying that something that was different from effectively what they'd seen on TV. And there's just that refusal to accept anything of it. So you've got all of these mechanisms that are reinforcing these set of bad assumptions.
Well, it was quite interesting. The other day, I went to get a cup of coffee in the morning at the local co-op, and there was somebody in front of me. He must have been about 75, and he did something that I've not seen somebody do for a while. He bought 3 newspapers. So
Right.
he had I think it was a Times, a Mail, I think it was the Mirror or the Star. Yeah. But that was something when I was a kid, every adult, I remember, I'd go and get my
I used to do
granddad.
that years ago. Yeah.
My granddad used to send me up to get the papers. And, I remember that, you would read the paper. I don't know anyone who reads a newspaper anymore, but he had gone by habit to get his newspapers. And I don't read the papers because they're full of shit.
They've all got the same. They've all got the same ideas. They've all got the same assumptions. They're all operating on the same model.
But it's all propaganda. That's not conspiracies. It's just fucking bullshit.
Yeah.
So I don't read that stuff anymore. But I was like, oh, he's still got that. God, he's reading. I was in my head, I was thinking, you're reading that and believing what you're reading. That's setting the tone for your opinions.
Yeah. Well, TV and the newspapers.
Yeah.
It is
but they're one of the
reinforcing.
same.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's the same ruling elite. Is the Westminster bubble, we would call it here, or whatever the equivalent in the US is. But so we are locked into this, and because we are because the system is obviously not working, and they are trying to fix it with a set of assumptions that no longer line up with the underlying reality. You've moved from a point where politicians are trying to solve problems on behalf of the public to now politicians are trying to solve the problem of the public. You see this all the time now. It's like they're always thinking about, okay, how can we... It's like they're thinking, we've got these bloody pros and they're doing the wrong things. How can we make them do the right thing? It is all geared at sort of changing our behaviour and trying to bring it in line, because the system that has been... the system that we are now living in, this, the economic shift, as Jess Booth would describe it, to a more digital age.
God damn it, Dan, you're sounding like a conspiracy theorist here.
It doesn't line up. So anyway, that got me thinking about, okay, what are...
Well, let's give me some examples on that. Or the listeners some examples where they're trying to control the public. Give me some examples. I mean, I've got my own.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for example, just the last thing that sort of I noticed was for example, the electric car thing, where they're sort of going to ban them. Now, I don't think that's necessary.
What do you mean ban?
Well, they're going to ban internal combustion engine cars by, I think,
2040, was it?
2035, I think
Diesels,
it was.
Was it diesels first? And then
I can't remember. But it was only a couple of years ago they're trying to push people into diesel. Now, I actually quite like electric cars. I think they are... I think they are on parity at the moment, and they're probably going to be better within a couple of years. And because they're on their own rights curve, so with manufacturing techniques, you tend to get a consistent rate of improvement or a consistent reduction in cost of these items as you produce more of them. So Wright's law, I believe, for cars was something like every time you have a cumulative doubling of the amount of cars that you produce, you get a 15% cost reduction. That can't happen in internal combustion engines anymore because there are so many cars out there. Let's say there's about 4 billion cars of internal combustion engines are being produced, or maybe it's 6 billion, I don't know, whatever the number is. You're not going to get a cumulative doubling at this point that gets you the extra 15% cost reduction. Whereas you are getting that with electric cars. It is a different technology, and we are seeing a fairly consistent price decrease. So within a few years, you're going to get to electric cars which are going to be cheaper than internal combustion engine cars to buy and to run. But nevertheless, it is an example of where they can't help themselves but be a bit heavy-handed about the way they're doing it, and they're just sort of bringing down the Banhaver, which is just going to antagonise an awful lot of people, which isn't probably necessary to do because people will make that switch on its own. So
I think there are examples that are more.
That was the first one that popped into my head. But what are you thinking?
Well, so you're talking about the problem of the public.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about Extinction Rebellion, who I find particularly annoying. I think their strategy is particularly annoying to glue themselves to roads, and I think a lot of their thoughts or ideas with regards to a policy with regards to fuel and oil is naive and not well thought out. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I support their right to protest, and I think at times you need civil disobedience. You need that option. You need that ability. Bear with me. It's the expansion of the laws regarding protesting.
Yes.
Where I can't remember the detail. Preeti Patel started it during COVID the first time, which I think were particularly, how would I put it?
Evil?
Let's say oppressive.
Right, yes.
To the point where a pillar of democracy is the ability to protest. You take away the ability to protest, you're matching the ability to protest in Red Square.
And the interesting thing for me is that all of the stuff that Extinction Rebellion is doing is already illegal and they can already be arrested for it.
Yeah.
And they generally are after they've held up the traffic for about 6 hours.
Yeah.
And you sort of see the police turn up and effectively protect them because you get the white van drivers, they get out their car and it's like, well, just bloody move them then, mate.
Yeah, they drag them off the road.
Yeah, and the police are basically protecting the protesters. And they sort of let them sit there for several hours. And then once the point has been made, then the police arrest them and take them away.
Have you heard the full conspiracy with regards to Extinction Rebellion?
Go on then.
So the full conspiracy I was referred to, this might have been you anyway, that if you look at their talking points and their arguments...
Oh, I did say this to you.
They very much match the government.
So their website is full of quotes from government scientists, the way I put it.
Yeah, so they're inspiring them to protest and then expand the laws. Yes. I don't buy that link. I think the government's being more reactionary.
I guess the point I'm making is you don't need new laws to deal with what they're doing.
No.
But they are being used in order to bring in the public order bill, which can then go after the people who have protested in the past in ways that has been entirely legal. So take, for example, the anti-lockdown protests that occurred. Now, those guys didn't block roads. They did it in central London. They gave notice of their plans. They sort of walked down Whitehall. I suppose they by sheer volume, they blocked the traffic on Whitehall, but it's not a major through route or anything, walking past Downing Street. They're giving themselves the power to go after those guys who are doing something which at the moment is entirely legal. So they're using them as an excuse in order to expand power. But I mean, you're seeing that more broadly is that governments all over the West now are equipping themselves with tools in order to go after the masses.
CBDCs.
Yeah.
Well, so here's another example. Let's go straight with Bitcoin. Okay. The opposition to Bitcoin that's coming from, whether it's, I don't know, within DC, particularly someone like Elizabeth Warren, or whether it's coming from the ECB, whether it's coming from UK government, that is a problem of the public because these are people who are so fed up with the fiat financial system screwing them. They said, this is lifeboat here. And that's something I want to use because you're fucking with my money.
Yes.
And then they're trying, that's a problem with the public.
I should have gone to the financial system first, actually, because there are much better examples there. So, in the US, they're bringing in that any transaction over $600 gets the IRS's attention.
Yeah.
The financial system is being used as a sort of surveillance tool. It's being used as the police now, effectively.
Yeah, the Pentagon can lose billions, the government can waste trillions, but you spend over $600.
I'll give you an interesting example, actually. So I looked at the World Economic Forum risks report that came out at the last conference. Now, they list out top risks over, I think, the medium and the long term. And a lot of those things on those two lists were stuff that they can have absolutely no effect on. It's basically climate change stuff. There's nothing the World Economic Forum can do. So I think that's flim-flam. You get rid of those. What's on those lists? Top item on both medium and long term is basically the public pushing back against the WEF policies. Yeah. Now, I'm one of those guys who actually sits and watch some of the talks coming out of the WEF and have done for years. For years now, they've been talking about increased civil unrest, pushback against, they paint it in flowery language, and I can't remember the way they describe it now, but basically, people are going to push back against what we are doing, is overwhelmingly what they're saying. So we know that their top concern is pushback from the public, and we know that what they are doing is they are equipping themselves with tools that makes that pushback much harder. So I think the 2018 Davos event was headlined on digital IDs. And coming out of that was a policy paper that was basically homework for national governments around the world. And if you just go, you can do it here in the UK, but you can do it in any Western country. You type in a title similar to the WEF plan, and you'll find a .gov paper, which is implementation of digital IDs. And then there's other policies which are perhaps WEF adjacent, such as the 15-minute city thing, where cities are being divided up into zones. And the selling point of this is you can have everything close to you. So you can have all of your leisure and work and whatever else within 15 minutes of your home, and that's great. But they're not actually delivering those things. What they're actually delivering is cameras and barriers. And then you've talked about the central bank digital currency as well. So you start to combine these things together. And what have you got? You've got governments which now have tools like more cameras and barriers to stop people moving around. You try doing something like a truckers' protest when, there's barriers that they can raise at any time. Now, at the moment, I know in places like Oxford, they're basically just big planters. But, in 10 years' time, that will be a proper metal barricade and all the rest of it.
You think?
Yeah. Well, you think it's going to just be little plant pots for the next 10 years? This is to get us used to it.
Okay. Yeah, I would take the other side of the bet. I don't think we're there yet, but I can see a scenario.
It's a process, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, again, just for that one, go and look at so I think the organisation behind that is C40. I think I'm getting that right, which is a collaboration of the 40 biggest cities, although it's a lot more than that. It's over 100 cities now. And just look at the policy documents that they put out. They are very clear at what they are looking to achieve, which is basically a future where people don't drive, where people consume considerably less. They even talk about the items of clothing that people might buy in the future. So, none of this is a conspiracy. You can just go and look at the policy documents. Yeah. They put it out there. The WEF does the same thing. They put out what they want the future to look like. Of course, none of this applies to the people who actually turn up to the WEF. They're not going to live like that, but the rest of us are going to live like that. So you start giving governments the tools of cameras and barriers through 15-minute cities and the way that that's rolled out, the digital IDs, and if it comes a central bank digital currency, you won't need police after that point because, try protesting when your money doesn't work when you're more than 15 minutes from where you live.
Oh, you will still need police if that's true.
Yeah, but the agree to organise will be...
I think we're still a long way from this. I know it exists within China, and I know there is like a trajectory of heading in that direction, but I think the freedoms that we have here in the West allow for us to protest. You won't get away with that in France. And they're not getting away with it in France. Macron's...
doesn't mean they're not going to try.
Oh, no, of course they're going to try. But I think that's the great thing about a democracy is that you have the ability to push back. You can't push back in China. They tried in Tiananmen Square. And they murdered thousands of people. You can't in Russia. You can't protest. Your options are being poisoned, being jailed, or being tortured. But here we don't do those. We haven't gone that far. We don't do that. So therefore, you can push back. And you're seeing that in France. They will not get away with it. Macron's approval rating is at the lowest ever. Okay. if you tried the same here, people will push back. They will protest. You've seen it in Amsterdam. You've seen it in Holland where people have pushed back again with the farmers. I mean, isn't the party that just won the last vote in Holland? Weren't they the Farmers' Party? So you've got those pushbacks. Like I say, I think they will try, and I don't think they will win, but they might have small wins. So I don't, like the end game you're painting. I don't see happening.
I'm describing a process rather than an end game, I think. Yeah. So when you're saying they're going to have small wins, but I mean, that's how it works, isn't it? Is they take an inch and then they take another inch and you basically just keep doing that until you're, a couple of miles down the road, and it's like people suddenly wake up to it and they start getting a bit riotous, and then they come back a few inches.
Or you end up
and then they carry on again.
The history will tell you end up in full revolution.
Yeah, I mean, people in the West are fairly comfortable, so possibly we could get to something like that. I'm more describing that they are trying to score these incremental gains. They are trying to equip themselves with tools and laws that enable them to solve the problem of the public, because they are increasingly recognising that there isn't enough pie to be divided by everybody.
And not whether this is evil or not, but do you think, is this organically the way this just happens because of the way the debt is spiraling, and it's the way of managing it, and these are naive people who think they're doing the right thing rather than evil people thinking, ha ha ha, I've got control over you?
Yeah, I don't think it's nefarious evil or anything like that. So I mean, I described how it came about with the boomers through basically compassionate reasons. It was a large generation in a small world, and they wanted to be compassionate to their elders, and therefore they brought in these insurance policies. But once you then get to the point where that large mass of people are no longer paying but are the beneficiary, those insurance policies don't work. That was born of nothing more than compassion for elders, and a misappreciation of what the demographics would do to that. When it comes to the politicians, again, I don't think there is anything nefarious behind this. I think the majority of politicians think in their own mind that they're doing the right thing. And it's increasingly getting to the point where they realise that they're going to need to push back against the public, but they think they're doing it for the public's own good because they are trying to protect this existing system at all costs. And in their own mind, they're thinking, well, this system gives us stability and order. It gives us a justice system. It gives us healthcare. It gives us all of these things, and therefore I must protect this system at all cost. And I think very few of them are looking at the system as a whole, including the money system in that. When it comes to nefarious actors above government level, because I certainly don't think that governments are the key decision makers. The key decision makers are well above them. Who am I talking about? So, it is going to be international bodies. It's going to
WHO, UN, World Bank.
To a certain extent. So, I can evidence it. So, if we go back to, say, the pandemic response, which I'm highly, highly critical of. Mm-hmm. But you look at the House of Commons, the select committee reports that got in Dominic Cummings and Matt Hancock, and you look at what they actually said on the record as to how they were making their decision-making process. It was, Bill Gates' name was mentioned like every 5 minutes. There was hours and hours of testimony, and he was being brought up all the time. Why was he being brought up all the time? He was being brought up because his foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, had done a lot of thinking about how to respond to
By the way, is that just the Bill Foundation now?
I think her name's still on it, I'd imagine.
Right.
But they were referring to them all the time. Now, the reason is because we have got ourselves to a point where government doesn't do their own thinking. They refer to external groups who have put together sort of policy proposals and policy packages.
Yeah, and we know this because of the influence that the WEF has had on the Trudeau government.
Mm. Oh, that's very obvious on that particular case.
Yeah.
But I mean,
but didn't want the WEF even planting like people to work within government. I'm almost certain of this. See if you can find that, Danny.
The reason I bring up the pandemic response is because it's all on record in those select committee reports that you can watch on YouTube. The fact is that they were not driving policy themselves. They were basically getting it fed to them from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And you can go and watch this on YouTube. those select committee reports. They were being told what to do. Now, my point is that doesn't just happen in pandemic response. That happens in basically every level of government. Politicians, their job is to look good, respond to news flow on the day, and be hopefully charismatic enough to get elected. They don't have the capacity to start thinking through policy. So the way this works is not that you're in opposition and you spend all your time in a dark room writing out a ideology or a policy plan or anything like that. All you do is focus on trying to get yourself elected. And then once you're in, you then turn to the people who give you policy solutions and policy packages that you can then implement.
What do you find on that, by the way?
Not a lot. And from a quick look, I can't see anything conclusive.
Okay. Maybe I heard that in an interview or something.
I mean, I think you're right.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me, but I can't find anything at the moment.
No. Okay.
So, it's very obvious in, say, the US where, I don't know how long ago it was that congressmen and senators actually sat down and wrote legislation themselves. That probably happened at one point.
Well, we know it isn't because they work with staffers. So we know that if you really want to interview a politician, you've got to influence the staffers and the staffers.
So I think that has passed as well. So then it would have been the staffers who were putting the policy together. And I'm pretty sure it is the case because I've heard this. I can't remember where I heard it, but I've heard it from multiple sources now. That the way it's done now is the lobbyists write the legislation.
Well, but I think it goes through the staff. I think the lobbyists
through the staffers.
Target the staffers.
Yeah, they probably read it and make the odd change here and there, but effectively the policy has all been outsourced to lobbying groups.
And we know this on the Bitcoin front because Alex DeFries, who is a compulsive liar, who misrepresents Bitcoin and the mining industry relentlessly, he is being cited in papers that come out of government departments. We know that, don't we? We had that with Nick Carter, didn't we?
Yeah.
That report from the science...
From the White House. It was a Department of Science at the White House.
Yeah, Department of Science at the White House. Like, they were quoting DeFries, who is a compulsive liar. So we know that. So we know you can influence at that level.
And I don't think it's nefarious, particularly.
Well, how much time... Go to the Elizabeth Warren website. So we were looking at this the other day. I wrote to Elizabeth Warren the other day. That was it. And if you go to contact her,
Right.
then there's a big list of things like that you
can contact her for.
Yeah, or maybe it was the bit where she was fundraising for. Like, this list was contact me about everything from gun laws to cryptocurrencies to banking. I'm telling you, there may have been 100 things on this list.
Okay.
Now, there is zero chance Elizabeth Warren is an expert on these subjects. Okay,
Yeah.
She has to have the talking points on them all.
Yeah.
So it's only natural that she needs a team behind her.
I think her job is twofold. It is to raise money to get elected and to get elected.
Yeah.
And the staffers will be filtering a lot of this stuff through. But again, they don't have the capacity to be putting legislation together. It is going to be coming from lobbyists ultimately.
And they'll be testing it as well. What works, what's that? Have you found that list?
I don't know exactly what you mean, but there's this all over the website. But when you say share your opinion, it just gives you a form on contact.
Yeah. I found it the other day when I wrote to her.
I'm not sure exactly the bit you mean.
Yeah, anyway, the point being is I looked through it, I thought, how can you be an expert on all of these things? You have to have staffers and you have to have people feeding stuff to you. And staffers maybe are like, well, I've got too much to do, so I need somebody to feed this to me.
Yeah, now when I say I don't think it's nefarious, I don't think in their mind it's nefarious. I think the outcome of it is.
Yes.
Because, what these... So again, let's go back to the pandemic, the awful pandemic response. And we know how cynical and bad it was now because we've seen the WhatsApp messages that come out. So even when they knew they were wrong, they didn't want to row back on any of this stuff because they thought it might cost them electorally.
Exactly.
It was all about saving face after a certain point. But, to go back to the point about how the policy came in the first place and that referring to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation constantly that Hancock and Dominic Cummings did, in their minds, they are following best advice. So they are doing the right thing.
And you know what? Like, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has a good track record in supporting the eradication of certain diseases. I mean, didn't they eliminate polio around the world?
And they've helped massively with like malaria and things like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know that, I know a lot of people are quick to jump to Bill is evil and blah blah blah, and he went to Epstein Island, but they have done good things.
And I don't think
they can both be true as well.
Yeah, they can both be true. They've objectively done good things, and perhaps even Bill thinks he's doing the right thing.
Yes, I think that in his mind he thinks he is doing the right thing, but the point is that the solutions to the problems are getting moved further and further away from the public who vote for them and to these supranational organisations. I'm simply making the point that most policy is decided beyond the level of national government. Mm-hmm. So the role of the national government in all of this is to be a policy implementer, not a policy decider. And the real policy level is done at those supranational organisations or those large lobbying groups. So, power is moved as far away as it can effectively get from the individual.
And so I'm following everything you're saying. And, and some people think it's evil. Some people just think it's organically the way it works. I think for me, it's a lot of the way politics works, and the fact they've now got technology that can accelerate the things they want to do makes things a bit of a problem. One step to make this situation better, looking at the incentives, for me is maybe some form of separation of money and state would help.
Yeah. And I think it can be both things. It can be both, it can be a collection of people who think they are doing the right thing that produces a result that is evil for us because,
the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Well, and not just that, the people, as we talked about, national governments are the implementing layer, and it's the layer above that who are basically forming policy now. It's the lobbyists, it's the international groups, and they all think that they're doing the right thing. However, they are all the people who have benefited the most from the fiat Ponzi scheme.
Yes.
They are basically, what's bobbed to the top of this particular swamp. And from their position, what they perceive to be good is, of course, going to be a continuation of this system. It's going to be a continuation of the Ponzi, the fiat Ponzi scheme, and it's going to be all of those other things. So that has when you layer that back to a set of assumptions which no longer apply, which channel money to the top, it can be both simultaneously a bad outcome and effectively an evil outcome for the masses. At the same time, everybody's involved in it. I think that they're doing the right thing by supporting the system.
Yes. So how do we fix it? And it's important. Like, this needs fixing because I think it gets fixed through revolution, as I said, but I think revolution is messy, and it's maybe like we go 2 steps backward through government and 1 forward through revolution, but it's still a slow decline into hell.
So, I think we're alluding to 2 problems there. One is the economic set of problems, and one is the political set of problems.
Well, the political cycle, to me, is the biggest problem.
Yeah.
The political cycle without any...
Well, it doesn't match with the economic cycle.
No, it doesn't match with the economic cycle, but also there's no disincentive for politicians. There's no punishment for politicians for screwing things up badly. There's very little social cost. There's very little career cost.
Because there's no incentive not to kick the can down the road.
Yeah, but
there are disincentives to not do that because you won't get elected if you don't do it.
Yeah, but also poor performance. Every one of these fuckers leaves government and they end up on a board or a advisor to a company because they have influence and they can peddle influence and their mates are still working within government.
Yeah.
Like, that whole part is completely and utterly broken.
We talked about Macron earlier about, he's pushing through these reforms and, you think he's not going to be successful. I think he's going to be successful in a large element of it. I think he will see them down, but he won't be able to get elected again after having done it. But that is not necessarily a failure for him, because we know what happens with these characters is once they fail at the ballot box, there is always some international organisation which is willing to pay them an absolute fortune to head up some other thing.
Yeah, Tony Blair, rather than sitting in a jail in The Hague, facing...
his power levels have only increased.
Yeah, and he should have failed. He should have faced trial for war crimes.
Yeah, and instead now, have you seen him now? He's going along to. I watched a lot of his stuff at the WEF recently, but he's effectively put himself in charge of Africa.
Right.
And his Tony Blair's foundation is out there, giving them advice, but effectively doing the same thing that I've just described, which is being that layer above government, where he is designing the policy that then gets implemented by African governments. And what I found so interesting as he was sat there on that WEF stage was how he referred to my presidents. Yeah. So African presidents he sees as being sort of feeding into him. They're his subordinates. But that's the whole thing with this international group of policy setters.
Now, with him, I would go as far as saying he's evil. And the reason I'd go as saying he's
the Dark
evil,
Lord is evil.
Because he took us into a illegal war in Iraq based on fabricated evidence against the largest protests this country has ever seen. He had, I can't remember who, Claire Short resigned. No. There were a few people resigned from his government at the time, and he still took us into it. He didn't listen to the electorate. Nobody wanted that war. Everyone knew what it was about. And he did it anyway. And the consequence of that was regional destabilization, the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, including children. I don't find there's a particular significant difference between what happened there and what's now happening in Ukraine. Both unnecessary illegal wars.
So to my shame, I did support the Iraq war at the time.
Okay.
Because I realised it was a mistake now.
I supported COVID lockdowns and I realised it was a mistake.
And the reason I supported it is because I got wrapped up in the propaganda that was sort of coming out at the time. Now, of course, I recognise that the West has propaganda every bit as bad as any other sort of tin pot authoritarian nation around.
That's
not even the tin pot ones, but
that's why you probably have approached COVID with a little more skepticism than maybe I did. It happens. We're allowed to make these mistakes.
Yeah. I mean, Ukraine is interesting. I mean, I know you're a bit more mainstream than I am on that one.
Yeah, I reject the idea it's mainstream. I mean, Putin is a dictator, and he has assassinated people in foreign countries. He has poisoned people. He's shot and murdered journalists. He has stolen from the Russian people. He has amassed a huge amount of wealth and power. Look, I'm not going to pretend I know.
So I am not going to make the argument that he's a good guy because I do not believe that he is a good guy. Yeah. But everything on the list that you just gave me. Okay, we don't shoot our journalists. We just, Julian Assange, we just keep him in prison forever.
That's one, and I'm a supporter of Julian Assange. I've interviewed his entire family, but that's one. You still have journalists in this country who can criticize the government. Yeah. Yes, at risk, but they still do, and they will do. You do not have people. I mean, the Spectator does it. Private Eye does it. You don't have journalists criticizing Putin in Russia because they will be shot, poisoned, or... Okay,
but the West is much more artful in the way that they do it. Here we just fund them. So if you look at who's actually funding the newspapers, certainly since COVID, the biggest advertisers going into these papers are now government.
But I would entirely reject... I would reject that what's happening in Russia is analogous to what's happening in the UK. I think we have much more freedoms here, much more ability to criticize. Yeah. And Putin is a dictator. You don't have free and fair elections. If you try to become, if you attempt to become an opposition party which gains any ground, you face arrest, coercion. Navalny was poisoned.
Yeah, so I'm certainly not going to take the opposite side. And
I don't see Rishi Sunak poisoning the tea of Keir Starmer. If he starts to gain ground, he will just lose an election. So to me, they are entirely different scenarios.
Okay, so I'm perfectly happy with saying all of that, but that's not my point of difference. My point of difference is that for example, we could have had a peace deal in Ukraine in March, and it was Zelensky who unilaterally pulled out of that.
Why? What were the details? I'd have to know the details. What was the peace deal on offer? Did he have to give up more land? They've already had Crimea stolen from them.
We don't know the full details, but we do know that basically they were several drafts in, and they were sort of basically the 11th hour, and it was the signing stage.
Yeah, see, I can't judge it without knowing the details, the evidence. But they have had they were attacked once, had Crimea stolen, and they've been attacked again. What's stopping it happening again and again? Like maybe this is the final resistance.
Yeah, so I think this is closer to our point of difference. Is that if you frame that conflict through the way that the media has described it, it would be completely immoral to take any other view than the view that you're taking right now.
I don't need the media to frame that for me, because I rejected the Iraq war and the media supported it. Like I can independently make decisions. I can independently see what's happening in Ukraine. I can independently see what's happening in Belarus.
Yeah.
I can see the history of Russia attacking previous Soviet states. I can see people being poisoned and murdered abroad. I can see the destabilization efforts. By the way, which usually brings people to into their world of whataboutism and say, what about, and I can completely agree that also that we've been a destabilizing force in the Middle East and completely criticize our politicians.
So all of that granted, but I think the way that I'm approaching this is perhaps a little bit differently, which is to look at it's more of a civil war that has been raging since 2014. I don't see it as a unified country which has been invaded by a foreign force. I see it more as the people in Donbass have been at war with the Kiev regime since 2014.
That's fair. Border regions, not just Donbass, it's other border regions.
Yes, yeah. Well, Donbass principally, and I forget the name of the other one, but
they are Russian-speaking people who have chosen to live on the Ukrainian side of the border. And how much do we know that?
They found themselves living there; they were born there, or whatever.
Well, yeah, but how much do we know that's being stoked locally? I mean, look, we'll never know the details, and that people who listen to this will take one position. They will be like, "Oh, you believe Russian propaganda, or you believe Western propaganda," or they'll say, "I've got no fucking idea." I think the ones who say, "I've got no fucking idea," are probably the most honest.
I did dig out. I mean, I won't show it to you now, but I did dig out an interesting CNN clip from maybe 10 years ago, which basically talks about the people in Donbass getting shelled by the Ukrainian government. And I actually know somebody, well, not directly, I mean, through internet magic, I know somebody through an online game I play.
Yeah, and I saw a video of Russians shooting down a Malaysian Airlines jet over Ukraine.
I'm not saying it's great here, but, I knew somebody who lived in the Donbass who was getting shelled all the time, got fed up with it and ended up moving over into Russia. So I see it more as that sort of conflict.
You're right. It's probably a border civil war.
Yeah, it's a civil war which sides have been brought into. Now, has the US done everything it could to avoid that war, or did it escalate wherever it could in order to get another forever war?
That I don't know.
Yeah.
I can build. The problem with all these situations, I can build both arguments. Which I don't know if that's a strength of mine or a weakness. I can build the argument, it's another forever war. It funds the military-industrial complex. Or I can say, no, this is Russian aggression against. At some point, you've got to stand up to it.
I guess how we got onto this topic in the first place is more that the media narrative has been very good at painting this as, Ukraine is all one people, one happy family who all agree, and then Russian tanks came rolling over the hill.
I disagree. Maybe on American. I mean, I saw a specific coverage. I can't remember if the BBC or Sky News or whoever that covered what was happening in the Donbass region, the political escalation, what was happening at the local police departments, how there was like tit for tat battles between the Russian natives living in Ukraine and the Ukrainian locals. I've seen all of this. Like I've dug it. I've dug into it.
Yeah, but I mean, you're not typical of the people who.
No, but this was. But you're saying mainstream. I saw this in mainstream coverage. So, and sometimes the mainstream may be right. Even if you are anti-mainstream media, sometimes it may be right. I don't think I'm falling for propaganda to make the claim that Russia is a aggressive nation. Who've entered another country and they are looting. Yeah, and again,
I am not taking the opposite side of that view. I am saying that Western powers are all too happy to have a war.
Historically,
it is serving their purposes.
Yeah, historically, yeah, but they didn't start this war. So it's like that
depends if you see it as a civil war.
I mean, look, I would find it very difficult to blame the West for extending a war they didn't start. I mean, this is Russian aggression. Russia invaded Ukraine. Russia positioned their troops across the border for months. Russia has bombed cities. Russia has conscripted people to sign up.
Kiev was bombing Ukraine for many years before. Kiev was bombing the Donbass for many years.
Was that following the previous invasion when they annexed Crimea?
I don't think you can draw a cut-off line at any point and say history starts off here. This is a whole series of events that goes back many decades.
But if you're making the claim that they were bombing them, I would just say, was that a pre or post Crimea annexation? Because if that was post, that's war that's already started again from Russian aggression. So I don't know without all the details, but I don't know the full details. But I'm not. I think the point I'm making is so people focus is that I'm not just going to reject something because it was reported by the BBC or Sky News.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily at this point trying to. I am certainly not trying to say that there is a good guy and a bad guy here. Yeah. I'm saying there's two sets of bad guys.
Okay.
And it has suited the West to advance another forever war, which is
perhaps.
Yeah,
perhaps.
I think the more interesting aspect of the of this conflict over the last couple of years is what it's done to the euro. Because there is a framing of this, which is we know that the US dollar is in danger at the moment. We know that they have been coming down hard on crypto as a potential escape route.
Mm-hmm.
I saw the great interview you did with Doomberg recently, where he's describing Operation Choke Point 2, effectively. Bitcoin is a threat to the system.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, what is the biggest threat to the dollar today? Well, it's
the Fed.
Okay, I meant it as external. It's actually the euro. So something like 60% of international trade is done in the dollar at the moment. Second place is the euro, which was accounting for something like 20% of international settlements. Now, what has one of the interesting effects of the last year, this conflict, been? What's underpinning the US dollar? It's basically the US economy and the US military. What's underpinning the euro? It's Germany, really, isn't it? I mean, I know there's 26 members of the Eurozone, but it's Germany. And it's not the German military, it's the German economy. What is the German economy? Well, that's a 5 trillion euro economy, which is all based on 50 billion of cheap Russian energy. And that has effectively been kicked out from under them.
Now you're given an excuse for bombing the Nord Stream pipeline.
Well, I mean, come on, what's going on there? That is the US effectively crippling the economy of Germany.
Danny, can you look this up? But prior to the Iraq War, I'm under the belief that Saddam Hussein wanted to move away from pricing oil in dollars to the euro. Yeah. And he wanted to do, Is that true?
Well, that's what Alex Gladstein said on the show,
Yeah. And so in that scenario, that's a threat to the dollar being the global reserve currency, in that one of the largest producers of oil is moving from moving away from pricing oil in dollars to the euro. So that was a threat. And then we get some...
Isn't it interesting? Every time a viable threat to the dollar comes along, they find American tanks rolling down their driveway before long.
Yeah. But I never actually fully... Gladstein told us that, but I never actually fully researched it.
Yeah, me neither.
You can have a look.
But the taking out of the Nord Stream pipeline, it has had a hugely damaging effect on the German economy, which has knocked the legs out from under the euro, which has significantly reduced the potential of the euro to offer a threat to the status of the dollar at a time when the dollar is at the weakest.
Yeah, but they just moved to the yuan.
Yeah, that's harder to take out at that point. But they are a very small part. And there's a lot of challenges for the China becoming... I don't think China wants to become the reserve currency.
Anything?
Yeah, in November 2000, tried to price his oil exports in the euro.
Is there any additional context or interesting things in that? Anything tied? What date was that?
November 2000.
When did the Iraq War start?
March 2003.
Huh. And you would need that much time to build up a case. It's not like you could do it in November and evade it in December. But now we know what the fuck you're up to.
There are conflicts all over the world, and we don't hear about most of them.
Yeah,
I think in 2020, I remember looking up there were 14 live conflicts around the world. I would
have thought there'd been more.
Yeah, and we only heard about one of them, which was the Ukraine one. Now there are.
That's not true. That's not true. That's just not true. So we've continually heard about what's happening in Yemen.
Yeah, I mean, Okay, you're right. It's
Which
not.
is
It's
a
not. It's not. It's
humanitarian
not a case that it's
crisis.
invisible. But what are most people aware of? You've got to remember that you are not typical when it comes to the level of attention to world events you play.
BBC covers the Yemen war.
Not to the same degree, to be fair.
No, not to the same degree, but there is a different scenario when it's I mean, how long has that war, Saudi-Yemen war, been going on for? Like a couple of decades, perhaps. I don't know. But this is a brand new war, and it's happening on the border of Europe. Of course, we're going to see more of it. And also, it's Russia, the second world power in war. It's a nuclear armed nation, starting war on the edge of Europe. That is more newsworthy than something that's happened between Saudi and Yemen. But we do hear about other wars. If you name me the other wars, I mean, trying to remember them.
Oh, I mean, I'd have to look them up at this point.
Yeah. I mean, of course, but it's more newsworthy.
Yeah, and again, I'm not going to take the opposite side on some of this stuff. I'm not going to try and tell you that Putin's a good guy.
Yeah. Who's the worst bad guy?
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. And for me, like I say, the more interesting aspect is that attacking of rivals of the dollar. That for me seemed a very neat way to attack the euro.
Yeah.
And it was successful on that. Although that said, I mean, what you're talking about more broadly, it does feel like we're very much the end of an era. Because, I mean, the petrodollar has been, effectively America's greatest superpower over the last 50 years. And how did it get the petrodollar? I mean, basically because in combination with its own energy resources and going to the House of Saud and saying, we will give you military guarantees as long as you price in oil. Mm-hmm. And then going to everybody else and saying, you will price your oil in dollars or you're going to get invaded. And several of them did get invaded. Has led to this sort of era of everybody needing dollars in order to get energy, which meant that the US could then
print oil.
Well, print debt and use that to get effectively free money.
Yeah.
So they have effectively had free energy for the last 50 years. And it feels that is unraveling on a daily basis at the moment.
And hasn't Saudi announced that they're going to
Pause oil production.
Oh, well, no. That's
pause-
OPEC said they're going to reduce it by a million barrels a day.
Yeah.
That's because the price of oil was dropping. They wanted to increase it. No, Saudi are joining the BRICS group.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they will be. Who is it who also just said they're going to be buying Russian? Oh, Japan. Didn't Japan just announce they're going to buy Russian oil?
I think you might be right, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many announcements at the moment of people moving away from US hegemony.
Yeah.
It does feel like that is slipping quite fast at this point.
It is. It is.
I mean, we're certainly at the end of the unipolar era.
Yeah. And
as we're in a potentially dangerous spot because the US establishment is still very strong and they know that they've sort of been holed below the waterline at this point and they're lashing out. And that's what I think was driving the behaviour with the Nord Stream takedown and also with what they're doing at the moment with Bitcoin, the attacks that they're making on that.
So how do we fix all this, Dan?
So
How do you and I fix this, mate? What should we do?
I mean, we know how to fix the economic side of it, don't we?
Yes.
We fix the money.
Yeah.
We fix Bitcoin. So I don't think I necessarily want to...
Fix Bitcoin? Bitcoin's works.
Yeah. Fix it with Bitcoin.
Yes.
So I don't think we necessarily need to rehash that here because, these arguments have been made.
Everyone knows that, agrees with it. Well, not everyone agrees with it, but anyway.
I turn my mind to what's wrong with democracy.
Yes.
Now, I think about what I would do differently. It's effectively painting castles in the sky because none of this is going to change. But, I mean, for me, it's a useful thought exercise as to how it could be different because it's not necessarily obvious how bad our current system is until you line it up against something that could potentially be better. I'm interested in your thoughts on this, actually. Where do you think blockchains can come into this?
I don't.
Why not?
I only think Bitcoin because a blockchain does one thing. It was designed to solve the double spend problem, and it works as a self-contained system where the token exists within the system.
So do you think Bitcoin is money but doesn't necessarily have use cases beyond that?
No, not entirely. It is a time stamping machine, which can be useful. But primarily, I care about Bitcoin as money. And the blockchain was designed as a way to solve the double spending problem. And that's what I think a blockchain is for. And I think blockchain has been used by marketing people to sell other kinds of ideas and things.
I wonder if it's potentially bigger than that. Because, okay, look, electricity was the digitization of energy, which allowed the use of energy to expand significantly. The internet was the digitization of information, which has allowed the amount of human knowledge to expand dramatically. Are blockchains not the digitization of value?
No.
Beyond just money?
Bitcoin is a digitization of value.
Okay. Where I'm coming from is, if you frame it as the digitization of value, then a huge part of that is going to be money. But there are still things that are valuable over and above money. So I'll give you a small example and a big example. A small example might be something like hotel reservations or airline tickets or something like that, or even coupon vouchers for your local supermarket. All of those things have value, which would benefit, I think, going on some sort of blockchain that makes them more easily tradable. So if you can't make your hotel booking at the moment, you just don't turn up. And it's not great for you because you're out of pocket for this, and it's not great for the hotel either because they can't sell all the ancillary services that go with it. If that was on some sort of blockchain, then that would allow you to very easily resell that through the blockchain to somebody else, which benefits everybody.
So you're going down a rabbit hole that is a necessary one to go on. I think it's important to go on it, and then you realize why it doesn't work. A blockchain is just a database. That's all it is.
And it's a really slow, inefficient, expensive database.
Yeah, its only thing that it's really good at is that it stops the double spend problem.
And it's censorship resistant.
Yeah. But this is subjective, but I'm going to paraphrase something that Parker Lewis says. He's a guy who's written a lot of stuff about Bitcoin, really smart guy. But do you know what he thinks is the number one factor that gives Bitcoin value?
Security, perhaps?
No, that there's 21 million. The fact there is a hard cap. The hard cap is what we don't have in the fiat system. We have it in the Bitcoin system. That's what gives it value. And he's therefore saying the number one thing we need to do is ensure we enforce the hard cap. Okay, so that's what Bitcoin does. It has to enforce the hard cap. I'll send you some of his articles. They're in a series called Gradually, Then Suddenly. And so if you enforce the hard cap, then you still have to have the ability to be able to spend it. You have to have the ability to be able to send it to each other. And so you need the blockchain to do that. That's how, along with the rules of consensus, that's how you batch up transactions and you allow people to send value to each other. That's what it does. But what it stops you doing is lying. Okay? Because in each block, you have to follow the rules of consensus and check that hasn't been spent before. And so that's what a blockchain does. But it's slow. It's inefficient. It takes like 10 minutes to get all the transactions together. We need layers above it to make it work. What do you think a blockchain actually solves? What do you think a blockchain does that another database doesn't?
For me, it is the digitization of value. And I know you say it's slow, but it's still potentially a lot faster than a lot of the other systems that we have. I guess where I'm essentially going with this is I am asking the question, and I'm not wedded to the solution here on this. I'm just thinking that if blockchains are the digitization of value, well, a vote has value. Is that something that could be better expressed through a blockchain, perhaps even on the Bitcoin network?
But what is it you're trying to fix that's wrong with the ballot box?
Maybe it's worth coming back to this then, because I'm thinking of this as a potential tool that gets us to assists with the solution, but it's not the solution in itself.
Like if you said to me, I think we need to move to liquid democracy, whereby your vote can float. The idea to liquid democracy is super interesting. It's like rather than voting every 4 years, you have a floating vote. And if the government is piss poor and your vote floats over and then suddenly they lose their majority, they're out of power. Well, and I like that idea of liquid democracy because rather than kicking the can down the road, it's live. It's happening right now. And it's upon them to retain their leadership constantly. And as they fuck up more, they can see they're losing power, and then they have to, try and retain it. If you said to me that we need some way of digitizing our vote so we can have liquid democracy. So I can literally on my phone go, do you know what? Fuck you, I'm changing my vote. I get that, and that's great. But I still don't need a block. You still don't need a blockchain.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so maybe the blockchain is a red herring on that, but I think that's tangential to my point, so it doesn't particularly matter. I think everything that you're saying there is absolutely right. What are the proper principles of democracy? Because at the moment we have this democratic system, but I don't think we genuinely have a democratic system. I think we have something that we call democracy, which is effectively wearing the skin suit of it. I mean, you think about... we've got 650 MPs, okay? Mm-hmm. I know not all of them turn up, not all of them take their seats. But what you've effectively got is 650 people who are all elected by the largest minority within their constituency. Now, because we've got a fairly uniform culture, a fairly uniform media, and I know we've talked about the influence of the mainstream media and, you know, the amount of information you can get out of it. But you've got to admit that the vast majority of people are consuming that media and they're consuming the simple messages within that media. So when you have, if you look at any particular constituency, maybe I should have looked up Bedford before I came here, but you'll find that most MPs are elected with a minority of the vote. So it's simply the largest minority within each constituency, okay? So you get this very uniform set of opinions that are spread across this. And effectively what you end up with is 650 people who all believe broadly the same thing. They've got some variations, but not any significant variations. So where this was particularly marked was over the lockdown period. Really, out of 650 people, there wasn't one who was against it. They all voted for it. What about Bitcoin? Out of the 650, how many of them think that Bitcoin is a crucial issue? If you were to take 650 random people from the population, I bet you'd find at least one of them who thinks that Bitcoin is the crucial issue of our times.
Yeah, but isn't that down to the gaming of politics, whereby you have to follow the whip?
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what happens because. Entering politics these days is not decided by somebody, you know, thinking I've got a better set of ideas and I'm going to run and I'm going to try and win people to my point. It is we have been sort of dragooned into this situation where there's a red team and a blue team, a little bit of a yellow team, and to get selected to go on the list, to go on the candidates list, is the selection criteria, and the parties are. Looking for a very uniform set of characteristics within those people. So what you end up with is 650 people who all think pretty much the same thing. They've all got the same set of solutions to stuff. And anybody with an alternate view outside of that, which is particularly marked when you look at any particular issue such as Bitcoin or lockdowns or whatever it is, you see that those views are simply not represented.
It's kind of what that thing I was talking to you about. Do you remember?
No, what's that?
Do you remember I said there's that Venn diagram of things, which,
yeah.
So I was saying to Danny, the way I see it at the moment, there's a Venn diagram, right, of topics whereby you've got, say, Labour on the left, Conservatives on the right, and within that Venn diagram, the topics they will debate. And in the left circle is the Labour opinion, and the right circle is the Conservative opinion, and there's ones that overlap where they kind of probably share opinions, okay? So, for example, on tax, in the right, it would be Conservatives, which are lower tax. In the left, it would be Labour with higher tax. And the agreement bit in the middle is that, well, tax should exist.
So I think that's the view that they try and pretend exists.
Hold on, bear with me. But where they overlap is they agree tax should exist, right?
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is, if you come out with a thought that doesn't fit into either circle, you're a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
So if you come out and you say, well, I think Bitcoin should exist, that's not acceptable because that's not that's not a subject where one's saying yes and no or they agree on. It's outside of the remit they're willing to discuss. So you're a conspiracy theorist. But if it's within those sides, it's acceptable discussion. So climate change is acceptable debate, whether you agree it's an issue or not, because that's something they debate over.
So the way the political system works is they want to have very vigorous debate within a very narrow range of topics.
Yes.
To give the impression that, you know, like you say, your two Venn diagrams that hardly overlap. I think actually those circles are almost entirely overlapping with just a little bit of slither around the outside that they don't overlap on. And you can see, say with Liz Truss, I mean, she didn't have to go very far out of the mainstream view. It was just, okay, let's cut taxes a little bit. And for that, she was outed 40 days. you don't have to stray far at this point.
So my brother, listening right now, is going to be banging his fists on the table and say it was more than that with Liz Truss.
Yes, to an extent, but what argument would he make there?
I'm not going to make his argument for him.
Okay.
But when I previously raised the fact there may be a little bit of conspiracy around her ideas or policies with regards to driving growth that were rejected, and the markets reacted in a way to get rid of her because her policies were a threat to the status quo, that kind of thing. Like I brought up before, and my brother's like, well, hold on a second. These were unfunded policies. These were massive tax cuts. These were unfunded policies. That's the market reacting to the idea.
So two things on that. One, yes, she brought forward the tax cutting element of it, and then said, and a month later, I'm going to give you the corresponding cuts elsewhere that balances this. So yeah, she did split them out, and then she should have brought those both together. But she was in a bit of a hurry to try and get this bit through. But as I mentioned on the last show, the market knew about all of that in advance. The only thing they didn't know about was the $2 billion cost of the top rate tax cut. And actually, the issues in the Bank of England had been brewing before. There was quite a good Unheard article, which I'll have to send you, which lays out the timeline of how the pension crisis in those bonds had been brewing, and analysts were talking about that was going to be an issue, regardless of what Liz Truss did.
Fair.
So I won't get too much into that. But my point is more that there is a very narrow set of consensus opinions within Westminster at the moment. So I would ask the question differently. What would be the principles of good governance? One is, I think that the governing should be as close as possible to the governed. This is something we've talked about a number of times over this discussion, is that power is actually moving further and further away.
Yeah.
National governments are just implementers of policy. They're not formulators of policy because they're too busy doing the day job, which is funding, reaction, getting elected. All the policy idea comes down from above. So governing should be close to the governed, okay?
You're talking about localism.
A more advanced form of that, yeah,
Okay.
effectively. So
I'm
for
not opposed to that.
With my local councillors, one of them lives at the end of the road. So I can go on, knock on the door if there's anything I'm particularly upset about. I wouldn't do that because they have absolutely no power, and therefore there is no point. If I've got a problem with a policy that's coming out of the WEF, what the hell do I do about it? You can't even vote your way out of it because both parties are signed up to the same agenda.
Yeah, and devolution, I think, has certainly benefited Wales in some ways, Northern Ireland in some ways, Scotland in other ways. They can at least set local policy on certain things.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, but we're talking about expanding that into, and do you know what? The idea of expanding that into counties, I think, is a great idea because it makes counties compete with each other.
I love that. I would do it slightly differently in the UK because we've got a lot of history here. I'd actually return to the ancient kingdoms.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, I'm not necessarily saying bring back the kings along with it. It's just that sort of size of unit.
Just thinking of Game of Thrones.
Yeah. Don't get caught up on the kingdom element. I'm just talking about the historical roots of this. So, I would probably describe myself as a bit of a Wessex nationalist. I'd like to see Wessex return as a sort of autonomous political unit. The reason being is that's about the same sort of size and scale as a Wales or a Scotland.
Yeah.
And then you could do the same. You could do the same in Mercia or Northumbria.
Well, I just look at the US. I have friends that have moved from California to red states because there are tax benefits or they like the differences in the laws. And there's that big push for states' rights. I like that. There is you get no legal or tax code benefit for moving in this country. So there's no competition between counties or regions.
So what that removes is innovation.
Yeah, of course.
So if you have a single, and in fact, not only are we anti that in this country, we actually even have a term for it. We call it the postcode lottery. So if anybody tries to innovate in any particular area of the country and it produces a different result, we call it the postcode lottery and we attack it immediately. So you get this uniformity of approach. Now, I've spent a little bit of time doing consulting in local government, and I found probably the biggest problem was the risk-adverse nature of the people who work in that organisation, because there is zero upside in delivering anything which is better for people. If you're the politician, there might be some benefit in it. But if you're the civil servant, the implementers, the people who actually were the permanent staff, there's no benefit in delivering something that's better.
And there's very little individual benefit because you're put into wage bands, and career progression is particularly difficult. That's why they tend to, I personally think, and I'm sorry if you work in the civil service, but I think the standard of people in the civil service is outside. I'm not talking about the police, the firemen, the nurses, who I think are superstars. I'm talking about the people who work in the local council. Generally, I think are a lower standard than the people you get in the private sector.
Yeah, so I do have a take on that, but let me just finish the thought. There is no benefit to the upside, but there is career risk if you screw things up.
Hell yeah. Is it?
So, yes. Yes, because you will be passed over for promotion. If you go out on a limb and you say, I want to do this thing, and it delivers great upside, fantastic. If it screws up and it costs the council money, then you are less likely to get that next promotion to director level or head of council.
But that's life. That's the same in the private sector. If you fuck things up, you're not...
Yeah, but in the private sector, there's also that commensurate reward if you do well. So what happens if you take away the reward, but you keep the career risk? What you end up with is a whole group of people...
You want about economic reward?
Yeah, effectively. Okay. Let's say you're in a medium-sized business and you come up with a zinger of idea and it doubles that company's revenue, you're getting a hell of a bonus, and you might be made a director. There's lots of upside from it. You will do very well out of it. And I think the private sector understands the opportunity costs and the risks associated with projects as well. But if you're in the public sector, if you attach yourself to something which might have upside to it and you fail in that, you get all the career risk but none of the upside to it. So what I found when I was working with local government is that there is an extreme career risk aversion to trying anything new. So that's why you get that really static response. Let me just come back to your point you made about the quality of the people. I actually found that at the lowest levels, there was either no difference or actually the public sector people were probably a little bit better.
Yeah, because they haven't had it beat out of them.
Yes.
They haven't gone through the monotony of working year after year with no recognition or no ability to progress, no ability to compete against the others. There's no benefit to turning up early and doing a great job.
Yeah, but I think at least halfway up the organisation structure, the quality of the people in the public sector is no different, or possibly even as good, or possibly even better. It's after you go halfway up. It's once you get into middle management, you start going beyond that to the senior levels. That's where the quality of the people really degrade, because these are not people who've taken risks. They're people who have avoided career risk their whole time. So these principles of good democracy that I'm talking about, well, it's close to the governed, it's good innovation, which we simply don't have at the moment. I like what you're talking about there about regions that can experiment. So I think the Americans are closer to this because they already have that state system. All they need to do is overthrow the yoke of federal government and get powers returned to the states. And I think that gives them the innovation and the opportunity to try. So the route for political re-engagement for them is a lot simpler and it's a lot clearer. It is return of those federal powers to state level. And I think that is something they are very much aware on. I want to achieve that here, if we can. Now,
it'd be amazing. By the way, it's never going to happen. What's going to happen is that everything's going to descend into chaos and we'll have a revolution.
None of this is going to happen. But if I could, I would go back to those ancient kingdoms, which is, the Wessex and the East Anglia and the Mercia and so on. And basically just groups are roughly the same size as we've got with Scotland and Wales now.
I would do the same. I'd actually bring back the kings and chop their heads off if they fuck up. Why not?
Yeah, why not go all in?
Yeah.
Now, what that gives you is it returns power closer to the level. But within that, I would have direct democracy. So I think what you called it liquid democracy, did you?
Yeah, well, liquid democracy is the idea that you don't have a term, you're in, and as soon as you lose a certain percentage of the vote, there's a triggering force, you're out of power.
It's real-time voting.
Real-time voting.
Yes,
I love that.
Exactly.
I fucking love that. I think it's great.
Yeah. Now, there are arguments for a representative democracy, but you can have both in this day and age with the sort of the speed of information. So if you are somebody who is really politically engaged, you can follow a lot of this stuff and you can vote directly on the bills themselves that are coming forward. For a lot of people, that's not going to be the case. So you should be able to delegate your vote to somebody else. Now, that person could be I don't know if you've got a brother, but say you and your brother, you're really politically engaged, your brother isn't, but your brother trusts you, well, he could just lend his vote to you and then you're voting 2 votes.
Gosh, I need to think that one through.
Well, it follows on from here that what will happen, what will emerge, is a certain number of people within each area, region, state, ancient kingdom, whatever you call it, would accumulate a large number of votes. So let's say you wanted to have the benefit of a representative democracy. What you would simply do is you'd say, okay, within each region, the 50 people who have accumulated the most delegated votes, you give them an office, you give them a salary, you bring them into some central chamber, and those are the guys who hold the executive to account.
That sounds like a scary centralization of power to me.
Yeah.
Why does
Imagine
it?
how
And more
many
bureaucracy.
Imagine how many like Elon Musk sycophants would just give him the vote and like the control that can then wield.
You've just given a load more jobs to people. You've just expanded government, Dan. We're trying to reduce government. Look at our national debt.
No, because it's giving you direct control of your vote by recognising that a lot of people would not necessarily want to exercise that themselves and would want to delegate it to somebody else.
I also like the idea of that governments have a budget, and if they go over budget, it triggers
Well,
election.
let me finish the thought on this. The reason why I like it is a lot of people will go, a lot of the NPCs, a lot of the normies will just go for a single charismatic figure, a very mainstream figure, and a lot of votes will accumulate with that. That is exactly what we have now. What we have is 650 people who think the same way. So under this system, what you'd end up with is you'd end up with a small number of people who've got an awful lot of delegated votes, who are completely mainstream, who are completely within the sort of central bubble. But beyond that, what you would end up with is people who are representing views that don't get any traction, don't get any representation at the moment. Almost certainly you'd then start getting delegates whose their primary focus was Bitcoin, for example. Over the lockdown periods, you get people who their primary focus was being anti-lockdown.
It's almost like that single issue voting stuff. Yeah, that's interesting.
But with the proviso that you could always take back your vote on any particular issue that you wanted to. And this would be a fairly fluid thing, because the reason people like the representative democracy is because you want a group of people holding the executive to account. That's the other thing you've got to do. You've got to split out the executive from the legislative. So the legislative would be your delegated vote, and it would be those are the people who define the job of the executive. Now, that's the other thing that you've got to split out is those executives. Why do we, at the moment, we have a very simplistic system of how this works, which is we vote for a party and they do the entire executive job. Why can't you do it by function? So so you have your regionalised system, and then each of those is going to want to operate, say, the NHS or the health service that you have, or operate the response services, the police. And why do you can have a different executive directly elected for each of those functions? You don't need a single executive.
I mean, it's never going to happen as well.
No, again, it's not.
Yeah,
and
so
I also like your idea that, or the one that we talked about before, is that those executives would then would be elected with a certain amount of budget.
I just think I think budget should be. Yeah, I have to operate with the budget for my business, my house, and everything, and I work hard to make sure I spend less than I earn. There is zero incentive for governments to operate within a budget because they're not spending their own money.
Yeah.
I love the idea that if they were over budget, or if they need to go over budget, that triggers an election, and they have to tell the country why they're going over budget, and then the opposition can say, "Well, we don't need to go over budget because we're going to do X." So there's competition to become more efficient, rather than the opposite what we have now.
And that's why I like the sort of regionalised system, because what you would then end up with is people in different regions trying different responses to problems. And some of them would be more successful than others. And you're starting to, you're seeing this in the US now.
Yeah.
Texas is doing very well on the Bitcoin front, whereas, was it New York has made it effectively illegal or something like that?
Well, not as such, but
yeah.
But it tends to go down political lines. But I just like that. I like tax wars. Yeah, we're in this country without that competition between regions. Essentially, they can constantly increase tax. Today, I've heard about the tourism tax that's coming in Wales. There's just constantly new taxes that are constantly hitting us because there is no competition on the tax front. But the idea that you would have a budget And then when the government's going to go over budget, that they have to tax us or print money, which causes inflation. The opposite. There's competition to reduce. That's what I like.
It's that innovation layer. That's what's so important here. Is you need people to try and find different solutions to all of this.
Dan, none of this shit's going to happen. It's a bit like
Yeah.
the legal system. There's no incentive for lawyers to make the system more efficient because they get paid less. That's why it's stupidly complicated with appeal after appeal and appeals courts and Supreme Courts and this fucking rule and that rule. But there's no incentive, so nothing's going to change. But it's good to talk about.
Yeah, it is. I think it's sometimes worth touching on these topics.
Yeah.
The reason being is you've got to kind of highlight how basically flawed the system is now.
Yeah.
But then again, it wasn't so long ago when people were saying, Bitcoin can never replace fiat currency, and that is looking increasingly less likely all the time.
Yeah.
And my thinking is
more likely.
Oh, more likely. Yeah, sorry, more likely over time. And my thinking is more, as these political systems start to unravel as well, it is worth having an eye on the future as to what we could do from it. But
Unravel, revolution. That's why I think it's going to happen, man. Dan, great as ever. We disagreed a few things on here, but that's okay. We went back and forth a bit.
That's all right.
I'm going to send some bits to you. There's some bits in there I can't explain as well as other people. I really want you to read some of Parker Lewis's work that gradually then suddenly...
I've got a podcast for you to listen to as well with John Seth and Perry Ann Boring.
Yes,
Perfect.
about voting. Well, let's send you those things. Those people do a better job explaining these topics than I. Where should we send people to find you?
Yeah, so I do a couple of days a week now at Lotus Eaters. So I've got a series there, Brokenomics, where I talk about the economics more than the politics, actually. I just thought the politics would be interesting to discuss today. So, check out lotuseaters.com. And I've got a Twitter account, which is kingbingo_. It's
Nice
a silly
one.
name, but I picked it 12 years ago when I thought Twitter was only going to be a thing for a few months.
Well, we will stick that in the show notes,
Yep.
and I'm sure on the next sprint, Danny will be in touch and say, let's go round 3.
For sure.
Good chat.
Thank
Cheers.
you, brother.